What are defining and non-defining relative clauses? Why do we need them? And how do we use them? You'll find out in this week's episode of
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with nearly 50 years of teaching English between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take all aspects of your grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary up to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm very well, Craig. And you?
I'm fine. We've had a few technical problems today connecting on the internet, but we're finally recording, so I'm pleased about that. What's first this week?
Well, we're going to start off with a voice message from Alejandro from Medellín in Colombia.
Hi Reza and hi Craig. I'm Alejandro. I'm from Medellín, Colombia. I wanted to put in practice your lesson about the house and home phrases. The last time that I could remember when I threw the money down the drain, it was when I bought a car like 3 years ago. I think that it's really common that the people, when decided to get a new car, the old car usually sell to the dealer or another person in a lower price that you usually bought it. Thank you for your podcast. Those are amazing. And see you later. Bye.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, for sending in your message. I really liked the expression to put into practice. And I especially love it when listeners practice expressions and grammar that we've spoken about in recent podcasts or in past podcasts. And you referred back to idioms connected to house and home, which was episode 220. Now, in the episode, we spoke about lots of expressions connected to home and house, etc. And one that you put into practice was to throw money down the drain. What does that mean, Reza?
Well, a drain is where water that you don't want, water you've used, or rainwater, dirty water, goes. It goes down the drain. So if you throw money down the drain, well, it would be spending it in a very foolish way. Imagine you put your money where the dirty water goes. What a waste. So to throw money down the drain is to waste it.
When was the last time you threw money down the drain? I haven't been spending any. I haven't been spending any money since last March. With the coronavirus pandemic, I've been staying at home and saving money.
That's true. We don't get much of a chance to throw money down the drain these days.
Alejandro said that he has thrown money down the drain on a second-hand car. I think he bought a car. It wasn't a new car. And he wasted his money. He threw it down the drain. Just one thing, Alejandro. Be careful of the article when you speak about people. You said the people, but you were speaking about people in general, not specific people. So no article. People love spending money, for example, people in general. But the people in my village drive second-hand cars. That's more specific, so you need the article.
You know, Craig, I've just thought of another idiom to do with throwing money down the drain, wasting money, but in a very specific way. Can I say it on the podcast? I'm not sure, but I, perhaps in my youth more than now, very often used to...
What secret you're going to reveal here?
Well, no secret, really. I mean, you know the secret. I used to money up against the wall. Are you familiar with that idiom?
Yes.
I bleeped myself there because it's a slightly rude word. It's a very particular way of throwing money down the drain, and it involves liquid coming out of the body. And it's usually as a result of drinking alcohol. So you drink alcohol, which is not going to help you in any way. In fact, it's only going to do you harm, isn't it? And then where does that liquid go? Well, we all know. So a word for urinate, money up against the wall, is a very particular way of throwing money down the drain. Have you ever done that, Craig?
Especially beer, because when you drink a lot of beer, then it tends to go through your body. And I remember being in a pub in the UK, a really, really friendly, actually it was an Irish Catholic club in the UK. And one guy came into the toilet and we were both standing there doing our thing. And he said, I drink so much, it makes more sense to bring the beer into the toilet, throw it down the drain and cut out the middleman.
He's right. A lot less work. Not as much fun, though.
We've received an email from Laura Fauth from Brazil. Would you like to read it?
Yes, Laura has written, "For me, it was very helpful to discover your podcast. I really like to study English. I enjoy listening and comprehension the language." I think we could improve that for Laura, couldn't we, Craig? That word comprehension.
Yes, it will be better to say understanding. I enjoy listening and understanding the language, or understanding English.
Laura goes on, "I'm with coronavirus." Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that, Laura. But what you should say is, "I have coronavirus." You have a medical condition. So she says, "I have coronavirus and it has been hard to deal with, but I'm using a lot of medicine and doing a lot of nebulization every day."
What does that mean to you, nebulization? I think she means some breathing exercises to help her lungs and her respiration.
Yes, that's what I understand as well. And possibly with the help of some kind of vapor.
Yeah, steam or something.
Yeah, something like that. That's nebulization as far as I know. She goes on a bit more. She says, "Discover your podcast." Well, she's using discover as part of the subject of that sentence, so it should be ing. "Discovering your podcast has helped me a lot to forget my symptoms. I stayed very, very happy." I know what you mean, Laura, but it'd be better to say, "I remained very, very happy because I listened to The Street Seller and I understood everything." The Street Seller was a specific episode we had. Oh, I can't remember the number, Craig. Do you remember the number of that episode?
Yeah, it was 351 back in February.
351, and that was perhaps true or not true story. We don't know. Isn't that true, Craig?
Yeah, we're not sure, but it was a very good story by our friend Jose.
So Laura finishes, "Thank you so much, guys. Don't stop doing the podcast, please." Well, Laura, your wish is our command. We won't stop doing it.
And we hope, Laura, that when you're listening to this, that you're feeling much better and you are getting over the coronavirus pandemic. It really brings it close, doesn't it? When you hear about the numbers on the news and people who are suffering. But when we get a message like this from a listener who actually has it and is recovering from it, then it really brings everything closer to me anyway. It really makes me feel good that we're helping Laura a little bit to get over the disease and recover from it.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that before. I mean, obviously, we don't want any of our listeners to be ill, but if you are ill, I guess a good way to pass the time, if you have to stay in bed, is listening to the podcast to kill a bit of time. Although you probably shouldn't listen to my voice too much if you're healthy, because it might make you sick. But if you're already ill, I guess it can't do much more harm.
Well, I've been listening to your voice for 20 years and I'm still not sick of it. So
many people are, Craig, believe me.
Well, Laura, the focus of this episode today, this podcast, the topic is perhaps not the most interesting, entertaining in the world. We're going to speak about defining and non-defining relative clauses. Let's try not to make it too heavy and too boring, but is there a simpler explanation, Reza? Because sometimes when you hear this meta-language describing grammar, like the object and the subject and the clauses. And is there a simple way to explain what a relative clause is?
Well, I would try and keep it as simple as possible and say this. Relative clauses can join two or more sentences or give more information about something or someone. That's it. That's the basic concept.
So it's not the main clause in a sentence, but a different kind of extra additional clause.
Craig, yep. You better tell the listeners what a clause is, though, because not everybody will be sure.
Okay, a clause is part of a sentence with a subject and a verb. For example, I jump. That will be a clause. It could be that short, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could be really short or it could be really long. It could be the man wearing the striped pajamas and the crazy beard that I met yesterday jumps. And all that would be a clause.
Yeah.
So just to give you an extreme example, a clause can be two words or it can be lots of words. Doesn't matter. If there's a subject and a verb, it's a clause.
So the first of these relative clauses, the defining relative clause, that contains information which is essential to the sentence to define who or what we're talking about. So we really need it in the sentence to know who or what we're talking about. Can you think of an example?
Of a defining relative clause.
Yeah.
Yep. The girl who works at the petrol station has just had a baby. Or I'm going to even say it a different way. The girl that works at the petrol station has just had a baby. So you can use who or that.
Is there a difference?
No difference in that sentence. No difference. And they're both used pretty much interchangeably. You won't affect the meaning at all by changing from who to that, if you're talking about a person. So just so you know where the relative clause is, in that sentence, it was the bit in the middle. Who or that works at the petrol station. That was what we call the relative clause. And as Craig said, it's a defining relative clause because that part of the sentence, who that works at the petrol station, it's essential to define who or what we're talking about. I tell you what, if I take it away, you'll get the point. If I just say, the girl has just had a baby, that could be a sentence, right? The girl has just had a baby. It makes sense. But the thing is, we don't know who the girl is. Could be any girl. I know lots of girls. What girl? Don't know. But if I add the defining relative clause, the girl who works at the petrol station, oh, that girl. She's just had a baby. Ah, the girl who works at the petrol station has just had a baby. I know now what girl you're talking about. So the relative clause in the middle defines the girl. It's necessary to know which girl we're talking about. So we call it a defining relative clause. Can you think of another example, Craig?
What about this one? I found an app for my phone which makes tea in the morning. That's not true, but wouldn't that be nice if you had an app for your phone that made your tea in the morning?
Oh, that would be nice.
So I can also use that instead of which. I found an app for my phone that makes my tea in the morning. And that describes what kind of an app it is, what it does. I can say I found an app for my phone, but it could be any app. So when I define the app, then I use the pronoun which or that and give more information. I found an app for my phone which makes my tea in the morning. That's what it does.
Yeah, as I said earlier with my example, we could take away the relative clause and we'd still have a sentence which makes sense. You could say, I found an app for my phone. That's a correct sentence. The only problem is I've no idea what app you're talking about because there are thousands of apps. So the relative clause is needed to know what app we're talking about. So that defines it. So that's why we call that type of relative clause defining relative clause. Craig, how can we recognize a defining relative clause when it's written?
Well, defining relative clauses don't have commas.
So very easy to spot defining relative clauses when it's written, if it's written correctly, because there shouldn't be any commas. If you think about it, it's logical, really. If the relative clause is necessary to define, to identify the person or thing, so you know who or what you're talking about, then it's a kind of integral part of the sentence. Because without it, you won't know who you're talking about. So it makes sense that you don't divide it with commas. That's the way I see it. Would you agree, Craig?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And also remember that the pronoun for people is who, when you're describing people, and the pronoun for things is which. However, in spoken English, when you're speaking a more informal English, you can replace who and which with that. And we said that in the two examples before. The girl who works at the petrol station has just had a baby, or the girl that works at the petrol station has just had a baby. I found an app for my phone which makes my tea in the morning, or I found an app for my phone that makes my tea in the morning.
Another interesting thing about defining relative clauses for foreigners, because this is a really strange idea compared to the grammar of most languages that I know, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. It's surprising to hear this. You don't have to say which or who or that at all in some sentences. Let me give you an example. Let's see if you can identify the missing words that I haven't said. He loves the chocolate I bought. He loves the chocolate I bought. That sentence included a defining relative clause. But you might be thinking, well, hold on. You said it used these words who or which or that. Yeah, but not always. I could use them. I could add them. I could say, he loves the chocolate which I bought. Ah, now you understand it much better, don't you? Or he loves the chocolate that I bought. Yeah, that's pretty clear.
So in Spanish, you need the que, wouldn't you, there?
Yeah. Spanish and whatever it is in Portuguese, as far as I know, and Italian and French, all those languages, you can't just leave out what would be in English, which or that. No. That's what confuses non-native speakers. In other words, we don't need the relative pronoun, the who, the which, the that, if, here's the important thing, if it is the object, I mean complemento, not objeto, yeah? We're talking grammar, object. The object of the verb in the relative clause. So think about my relative clause there. He loves the chocolate which or that I bought. The relative clause there is which I bought or that I bought. I is the subject, bought is the verb, and the relative pronoun which or that is the object. So we can omit it. We can leave it out. But only because it's the object and it's a defining relative clause with no commas. We can leave out the word which or that or who.
Can you think of an example where we could not leave it out, we could not omit it, where we need the relative pronoun?
Yes, very easy. All I need to do is think of a relative clause where who or that or which is the subject. For example, that's the girl who works at the petrol station. Or that's the girl that works at the petrol station. Who or that. The relative clause there is who or that works at the petrol station. Works is the verb, and who or that, the relative pronoun, is the subject there. So we must say it and we must write it. You cannot omit that relative pronoun because it's the subject.
Let's move on to speak a little about non-defining relative clauses. So a non-defining relative clause has extra information that's not needed to define the person or thing. Let me give you an example. This is true. My sister has just bought a new house. So I can say my sister's new house, which is much smaller than her old one, is in the same town. So that extra information in the middle I can remove, and the sentence is perfectly okay. My sister's new house is in the same town. However, if I want to add more information, I can put it in the middle or at the end and say my sister's new house, which is much smaller than her old one, is in the same town. 2 commas separate that extra information. So my sister's new house, comma, which is much smaller than her old one, comma, is in the same town. Can you think of another example?
Yes, I can. Hopefully you've all heard of Napoleon Bonaparte, or you might say Bonaparte, perhaps. And I think in Spanish they say Bonaparte. In English we say Napoleon Bonaparte, the famous French general. Napoleon Bonaparte, who was born in Corsica, was a powerful leader. So I've got a non-defining relative clause in the middle, who was born in Corsica, because that's extra information. If I say Napoleon Bonaparte was a powerful leader, you already know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. I said his name, so he's already defined. So the information who was born in Corsica is not necessary to define him. It's just extra information. So that's why we call those relative clauses non-defining, because they're not necessary to define who or what you're talking about. In other words, if I took it away, I would still know exactly who you're talking about, Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's the same as Craig's example. If he took away his relative clause and just said, my sister's new house is in the same town, instead of my sister's new house, which is much smaller than her old one, is in the same town, we know exactly what he's talking about, his sister's new house, with or without the relative clause. So those relative clauses with the commas when they're written are called non-defining relative clauses.
And there's one thing that sometimes causes confusion with learners of English, and I'll be interested to know what you think about this, Reza, because I think it's a mistake that many native speakers make also, is that isn't used to replace who or which in non-defining relative clauses. Do you remember we said last time with defining relative clauses, you can use that in informal English and spoken English? Well, in non-defining relative clauses, it's not common.
I don't even like the use of the word common there. I would say is not correct. You may hear it, but it's definitely not correct.
That's why I wanted to ask you, because let's look at our first example. My sister's new house, that's much smaller than her old one, is in the same town. Would you hear that from a native speaker?
You would, but I guarantee you, if you write it or say it in a B2 first exam, they're going to take points off you.
I agree.
Guaranteed. So don't do it.
I agree. My point is it's one of those aspects of grammar that's not really clear with some native speakers. So even though we're telling you it's not correct, you may hear it. So please don't come back next week and say, hey, Reza Craig, you said we can't say this. We can't say that's much smaller than her old one. But you may hear it from a native speaker.
Yeah. In fact, you even hear a much worse mistake. But it's probably because people haven't thought about what they're going to say before they say it. Here's a mistake which I make a lot, which is much worse than the other mistake. I say things like this. My brother, he lives in London. He's an accountant. I shouldn't say that. I should say my brother who lives in London. But my brain didn't plan in advance that there was a non-defining relative clause coming. So instead of putting in a relative pronoun, who, I said my brother, and then I remembered at the middle of the sentence, at that moment, to add extra information, but I hadn't planned it. So I said my brother, and then I kind of started a new sentence. Oh, he lives in London. Yeah, and that's bad English. But people do it all the time, don't they?
Yeah, and what's interesting, I'm just thinking about this now, is that kind of mistake of using that in non-defining relative clauses you hardly ever hear with the pronoun who. You probably would never hear Napoleon Bonaparte that was born in Corsica. That mistake is very, very clear. And as a native speaker, you think, oh, no, that's wrong. But my sister's new house, that's much smaller than her old one, is in the same town. I think that mistake is more common among native speakers.
Yeah, it's true. I've no idea why, but I think you're right. Another very important thing to remember, you cannot remove, take away relative pronouns who, which from non-defining relative clauses, the ones with the commas, whether they're subjects or objects, irrelevant. Subject, object, doesn't matter. You must have a relative pronoun always in a non-defining relative clause, the one with the commas, the one with the extra information which isn't necessary to identify the person. For example, her English teacher, who everyone really likes, has started a podcast. The relative clause in the middle there is who everyone really likes. Everyone is the subject and likes is the verb. So the relative pronoun who is the object. But it's irrelevant. We have to say it. We cannot leave it out because it's non-defining relative clause, the one with the commas, and subject or object, you have to use a relative pronoun. It's only for defining relative clauses that you can leave out the who, the which, or that if it's the object. Never in a non-defining relative clause.
And one more thing to remember, as we mentioned before, non-defining relative clauses, the clauses with the extra information inside, they are more common in written and formal English. And with Reza's example before of speaking about his brother, for example, we tend to use other language, more informal language, and not use non-defining relative clauses in some spoken situations.
Now, you hopefully have understood the basic ideas, the differences between defining or non-defining, but it's not that easy. There are occasions when, for a native speaker as well as a foreign speaker of English, it's really ambiguous. Sometimes it's very clear which one it is, defining, non-defining, but sometimes it's not. I'll give you an example. My eldest brother, eldest means the same as oldest, right? My eldest brother, who lives in Canada, is divorced. Now, if I hear that sentence coming from someone's mouth, so I don't see it written, I should still know that it's definitely non-defining. It must be. How do I know that? Because of the word eldest brother. The eldest, the oldest. You can only have one oldest brother. You could have many older brothers or elder brothers. I could have 5 brothers and they could all be older than me. They could all be elder brothers. But only one is the eldest. Older than all the others, right? Only one is the eldest. So it's got to be non-defining. Has to be. So if I write that sentence, it has to have the commas, right? My eldest brother, okay, I've defined him. My eldest brother, you all know exactly which brother I'm talking about. It can't be any other. My eldest brother, comma, who lives in Canada, comma, is divorced.
Of course, you can also say my eldest brother is divorced. That's a perfectly good sentence.
Exactly. So non-defining because it adds extra information that isn't necessary to know who you're talking about. But what about this? What if I say I have 2 brothers and I say, my brother who lives in Canada is divorced, but my brother who lives in France is married. So I have 2 brothers. I'm not talking about the eldest brother, so that doesn't help me. I've got no clues. I could be talking about 2 of 10 brothers that I have. But by giving the information who lives in Canada or who lives in France, I'm defining the brother. So then there's no commas because I need the information to know which brother I'm talking about in each sentence. My brother who lives in Canada, not the one in France, is divorced. But my brother who lives in France not the one in Canada, is married. So there we don't have commas because I need the information who lives in Canada or who lives in France to define the brother. So they're defining, so no commas.
I think we've spoken about your brothers enough. Let's speak about your sister. So if I say this to you, Reza, my sister, who is married, is very slim. Slim is the opposite of large or overweight. She's very slim. My sister, who is married, is very slim. Is that a defining relative clause or a non-defining relative clause?
The answer is I've no idea. Because if you say that, and I don't know your sister or anything about your family, well, I don't know. Maybe you got more than one sister.
Right.
Aha, you see the problem. My sister who is married is very slim. Well, maybe I have two sisters. Maybe I have three. Maybe one's married. Maybe they're all married. Who knows? So unless I know more about your sister beforehand, before you say the sentence, I've no idea if it's a defining or a non-defining relative clause. If I have only one sister, and I say my sister who is married is very slim, if I've only one sister, it must be non-defining, because by saying my sister, you already know who I'm talking about because I only have one sister. So all other information in the relative clause, who is married, is not necessary to define her. So it will be non-defining. But of course, if I have two sisters, if I say my sister is very slim, and I take away the relative clause, you're going to ask me, but which sister? The one who's married or the one who's divorced? So it depends in that case.
So what about this example, Reza? And listeners, is this defining or is it a non-defining relative clause? Okay. SpeakPipe, which is a free service, is a way for you to send voice messages.
Non-defining.
Why?
Has to be, because as soon as I hear the word SpeakPipe, then I know exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about SpeakPipe. So it defines itself. Any information which comes in the relative clause doesn't define SpeakPipe. It doesn't clarify what you're talking about, because I already knew when you said the word SpeakPipe. So non-defining for sure.
So Reza, if people wanted to practice their defining and non-defining relative clauses, how can they get in touch with us?
Well, one way, which is very good fun, is to use SpeakPipe. Did you see what I did there?
Yep, you used a relative clause. And you can find that service if you go to SpeakPipe, that's speakpipe.com/English podcast. Or you can send us an email with a comment or question. Emails to me go to Craig, Craig, @inglespodcast.com. And you, Reza, where are you at?
You can find me at belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you're interested in online courses, you can go to the Mansion Inglés website where there's a selection of paid courses. Go to store.mansioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to thank all of the people who support us through Patreon.
Relative clause.
Yeah. You see what I'm doing there, eh?
Yeah, very clever, very clever.
So thank you to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon, Patreon. You can see a full list of all the supporters on patreon.com/English podcast. We haven't got time to say everybody's name now, but we will mention the most recent people who have joined the scheme.
Very good, very good.
And they are?
They are Michael Slasky. Thank you very much. Javier Alberto, much obliged. Cristina Morente, very appreciated. Maria Teresa Garcia, or Maite, and Rafael. Thank you to all of you for supporting us on Patreon. You can join that lovely list of people and many, many more that unfortunately we don't have time to mention here for as little as $1 or $1.20, including VAT, the tax. You get instant access to recent transcriptions. To join them, go to www.patreon.com/ Ingles Podcast. That link and much more information can be found, as usual, on the website inglespodcast.com/354. We don't really know what we're talking about next week, Reza, do we? But we do have lots of feedback.
Yes, I often don't know what I'm talking about, but really, I have no idea what the theme for next week will be. So Craig and I better get thinking what we're going to be talking about soon.
Well, Reza is a person who always knows what he's talking about where grammar's concerned. Thank you very much for listening. Please join us next week when we'll listen to lots of your audio feedback. Until then, stay safe, take care. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. It's goodbye from me.
And bye-bye from me.
Music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.